I'm going to introduce to you the closest love of my life. This is a girl who, when I met her, I was 14 years old. She was 13 years old. And at that time, I went home after 3 days and told all of my 14-year-old friends, I think I just met my wife. And it was true. Now, it took me 8 years to convince her. And she dumped me 4 different times for other fellas, but I wasn't a Christian then, and neither was she. Shortly after baptism, she saw the light and she agreed to date me. And this year, we'll be married for 40 years. Now, that was 8 years of dating on top of that. So we've been together for a really long time. And that's our story together. Now, if we could go, Yannick, to the picture of the 30 would-be disciples. You'll hear that phrase. And again, we're going to have questions in a few minutes. But I wanted to share with you, this is a picture at the 10th anniversary of the Boston Church. This was in 1989, about the time Edwin was born. And you see right there on the left, that's Kip and Elena McKean. Immediately beside them, a woman with orangish glasses, and the fella, that's Joyce's sister, Joan, and her husband, Al. Then you see up at the top, Gordon Blasius. He was a guy who came to Boston to train. Steve Johnson is standing up there in the back. In front of those two, you see a guy with a red tie. That's Bob Gempel, my dad, my stepdad. Tim Anderson is immediately beside him. The couple that are there in the front with the red tie and the white shawl, that's Doug and Candy Blau. Behind Doug Blau is Fred Fowler. He was an early evangelist and is a teacher in New England. Then you see Pat Gempel. She's got that beautiful gray hair, which she's had forever. And that's where I get mine from. Then Joyce, radiant in white, and her somewhat odd-looking husband behind her. Immediately beside her is her mother, who was a disciple and one of the 30 would-be disciples and has also passed on at this point. Then there's a tall fellow at the back. That's Alan, our brother-in-law. The woman in the brown dress is Joyce's sister, Janet. And then the woman who's standing behind Joyce's mom is married to the guy that looks like Abraham Lincoln. That's the Moorhead, Stan and Betty. And then you see the woman in white with the purple and green. That's Lana Douglas. She was a member of the church. In blue is Joyce's sister, which is Jean. Beside her is Ellen, and she's married to Fred Fowler over there. And Donna is there. She's a disciple, but she is my mom's sister, and she was part of the congregation. But that's a picture of the 30 would-be disciples 10 years on. But we want to give you an understanding of what that little Church of Christ was like that Kip and Elena came to in the summer of 79. And so we have a picture from the summer of 75. And that's this picture. And this is that same wall, that same church building. And this was a group that was going out to share their faith. This is a photographic evidence of the only time I shared my faith as a teenager. And this group went out to a public area, sang songs, and handed out silly little trinkets, a round coin looking thing that had written on it a round to it, so that people would always say, I'll come to church when I get around to it. So we handed them little round looking coins and said, now you have a round to it, you should come to church with us. No one ever came through that form of evangelism. So, but I want Joyce to share a little bit about how her family got into the church, because when you talk about the 30 would-be disciples, it seems like half of them are either my family or Joyce's family. But the story of how God worked in her family's life is remarkable to me.
Yeah, hello to everybody. It's great to be with you. It's quite an amazing story. It started in sadness, but when I was just a young girl, my father passed away at the age of 47, and it was October of 68, and he passed away overnight, no warning, leaving my mother with 5 children between the ages of 16 and 7. I was 9 years old, the second to the youngest. And she was obviously completely distraught and alone, not knowing how she was going to get by. She didn't she didn't ever work outside of our home. Once she started having children, she just was a full-time mom, and she didn't have an education, and as far as going off to college or anything. And so she was just feeling like, how am I ever going to get by? And our next door neighbors actually immediately, who we knew, they knew my dad well, they knew me, they knew all of us. Obviously, they were our next door neighbors, and they were wonderfully friendly people. And they let the people know at their church what had happened to their neighbors. And that was the little Lexington Church of Christ. And so immediately, people that we didn't know just started showing and distributing love and caring for your neighbors and looking out for orphans and widows and putting their religion into practice. They started making meals for us, offering babysitting, offering really anything to help my mother out and take care of her and support her. And especially just offering encouragement and compassion and being there for her, spiritual comfort at that time. And so my mother was just amazed because she had been a member of a church locally, but there really was no response from that church. So she was convinced that this was people living out Christianity. And we started going to the Lexington church from that time on. In addition to that, the minister at the time, actually, he and his wife were both independently wealthy, had a crazy amount of money. They never took any money from the church to work for the church, but they really took so much care and comfort with my mother. They hired her and gave her work to do, just to do anything to help them, support them. But basically they paid her more than they needed to, and they took our whole family under their wing. They eventually ended up even paying for my older sisters to go to college, and just provided in a way that, it's amazing what they did for us. Wouldn't have had the future that we had without their love and generosity and their lives just trying to be like Jesus and take care of their neighbors.
So God was working. Surely that group in Lexington was a mixture of people, and they had good things and there were bad things. I mean, the funny thing is that same picture, if you look at that picture again, the black and white one, that's we were on a mission. We were going out to share our faith. That was also the parking lot where we had teen devotionals, and some of the older kids would go get alcohol and bring it back, and we would drink and get drunk in the church parking lot. I mean, there were ups and downs. There were good things and there were bad things. And one of the things, as we study the history, we see that. We see people who do incredibly good things, and then we see people sometimes who don't, who don't continue. You see incredible stories like Solomon, like so many in the Bible, but also we find that in history and in our history. And so that little church in Lexington in 1979 took a step of faith, really. The leadership did. I had come back the summer before. I started leading devotionals at Al Baird's church in Burlington and working with the teens. That all blew up at the end of the summer. And we went over then to this little Lexington church who was debating whether or not to close the doors completely. And we said, hey, how about we take a chance? And we invited Kip and Elena to come, and God transformed all of us in that next year. We saw 100 people baptized, and God was working in a powerful way. So that is a little bit of the introduction. From there, people started moving in to see what's going on there. People were being converted. The campus ministry, the Lexington church became the Boston church, and thousands of people were saved. But that's the beginning. That's an introduction for the early days.